Now, more than 800 million people from across the world, many of whom live in sub-Saharan Africa, do not have access to electricity. Closing the energy access gap and ending energy poverty remains crucial to delivering the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. UNDP has made an ambitious commitment to work with partners to provide 500 million people with access to clean, affordable energy by 2025. Ahunna Eziakonwa, Assistant Secretary General and Director of UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa, and Maxwell Gomera, UNDP Resident Representative for Rwanda, joined me for a joint conversation on the SE for All Forum right here in Kigali.
You know, I think for this continent, this is a crucial conversation because 80% of those without access, sustainable access to energy, live in Africa. So this is a bread and butter issue for the continent, and having this conference here has created a platform and opportunity to really have a deeper dive on some of the issues that we've been looking at and co-create Africa's story as Africa prepares for COP27, which is Africa's COP, right? Correct. So what are the positions that Africa will table and the negotiations that will have to be had? So it's been important to have conversations around just transitions, for instance. What does it mean? You know, we have a situation here where, historical responsibility for climate change is not really shared. Africa's share of that it's minute. Yeah. But the burden of climate change is shared. There's a collective burden there. Africa bears the brunt of a lot of what happens on climate change, even though its contribution is very minimal. Yeah. So just transitions mean a lot to Africa. In other words, Africa has to participate and contribute to a decarbonized world. Right. But to do so, and its journey towards that low carbon reality has to be supported in 3 or 4 different ways. The financing that's required for that, the technology and knowledge that needs to be transferred, but also the capacities that need to be built. Yeah. And it has to be done in such a way that no one loses out. Yeah, and no one is left behind. Exactly. Right. I want to bring in Maxwell Gomera, the UN Resident Representative for Rwanda. We're talking about support in different ways, of course, financing, capacity building in those kind of ways. In which way has the UNDP been able to look into Rwanda specifically? What sort of roles have you been playing from where you sit in supporting Rwanda to be able to close this energy gap?
Thank you, and thank you for having us. Yeah. Just to pick up on where Ahunna left, 107. That's the number of Rwandans who have lost their life since the start of the rain season this year, from landslides, and from other disasters. This is because this is an unusual rain season. So we've got right in the middle of our society an unexploded large piece of ordnance that we need to explode in a controlled manner, and that's climate change. Yeah. So this is not just another conversation for Africa. This is a life and death conversation for Africa. Correct. And for us here in Rwanda, we've looked at it in terms of what can we contribute to the conversation, but how else can we also be helped to take our responsibilities forward. So we've looked at changes that we can make in the transport sector. Rwanda has made significant investments in ensuring that a lot of the motorbikes, 35,000 motorbikes on Rwanda's roads, a significant number of those are being converted to electric as we speak. Rwanda also, a lot of its energy is coming from hydro and other sources that are greener. But we still have a challenge. A lot of people in Rwanda are still dependent on charcoal. And that is a huge challenge because it's leading to deforestation. As UNDP, through the Amayaga project, for example, we have been able to distribute 60,000 cleaner cook stoves and more efficient cook stoves that can help to reduce the dependence on charcoal. amongst many other things that we're doing in this country.
Right, that's very interesting. But of course, if we bring it from a perspective of the barriers, of course, there's the traditional belief and even accessibility of these other alternative sources of, fuel that we've continued to see many households opting to go for because of lack of either access to clean, affordable energy. I would like to bring you back on Ahunna. In terms of barriers from a continental perspective, what are we looking at, and what should be the closer solutions that we can say we don't need too much to be able to fix this? What are those quick fixes that you feel we need to do in some of the barriers that you're just about to mention now?
No, I think, we've seen a dramatic reduction in renewable energy products, for instance, in the price of renewable energy products. So that should make the pathway to renewables possible because the high cost is no longer there. But the initial capital investment, both for households and industry, is extremely high. And it's structured in such a way, it's a new structure that needs to be. So that's a barrier, that initial. The cost has come down, but you have that initial capital investment, which is completely new in terms of structure from what countries are used to. So that needs to be resolved. Capacity issues, financing, as I said earlier, but also you have this off-grid, on-grid situation. So in terms of solutions, we need to decentralize in terms of off-grid solutions so that people are able to access even if they're not on the grid. But then we also need the investment, the financial investment for that initial capital injection. And we need regulatory environment that is conducive. This is another barrier, because you can have the finances and everything lined up, but if the enabling environment is not created, then you get stuck. So it's not, it's a mix of things that have to align in order for us to actually make this successful.
Right, and Maxwell, when you look or listen to those barriers that she mentions, in what ways do you feel Rwanda could be some sort of, a go-to for lessons in terms of the solutions that Rwanda is offering in that area? When we talk about a conducive environment for investment, in which ways do you feel from your work here in Rwanda that you would say other governments across the African continent should be able to emulate this to be able to deliver this solution to the SDG 7 in a combined way?
The task is monumental. There's no doubt about it. Just to get to where we want to get it as Africa in terms of clean energy, we need to spend about $170 billion a year until 2030. This is money that will compete for other priorities. It will take away from the money that we must use for achieving other SDGs and many other things, right? And smaller economies and small countries like Rwanda cannot afford that. But Rwanda has been punching above its weight. At the moment, we are discussing possibilities of how we can access finances from global carbon markets. And those finances, if we are able to do so, they will enable the Rwandese government and the industry in Rwanda to be able to make those transformations that are needed to move us to a low carbon economy. And what we do need are international partners, international governments, looking more favorably at countries like Rwanda who are trying to play their part and see if we can structure deals, not as ODA, not as overseas development assistance, but deals that will use the same market instruments that will move us to somewhere where Rwanda gains, Africa gains, and the rest of the world gains.
So, you've got countries in Africa right now that depend on fossil fuels for their income, for their economy. How will those countries survive when those become stranded assets, oil, for instance? There are oil-based economies. So part of that just transition is figuring out in a collective way how those countries will have alternative sources of income to run their countries and feed their people if they move away from fossil fuels. That's not just to be left to the country to figure out, because again, this is a collective burden and collective responsibility. So that's a barrier, but you know, it can be solved.
It can be solved.
Again, if some of the things that Max is talking about can be deployed to the technology, the financing.
Right, and still sticking to the issue of financing, of course, during his address, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres did emphasize and challenge developed countries to keep to their commitment of the 100 billion USD per year to these developing countries. This has been what has been said in many cases, but with almost very little, being done by those who committed to actually remit these funds. In what ways do you feel African countries or even developing countries who are actually bearing the brunt of something that they contribute so little to, push for these commitments to be, lived by?
Well, I think we have to keep beating the drum on this one. I was just looking at some figures before this interview. From 2000 to 2020, about $3 trillion have been invested in energy solutions. Africa has only received 2% of that. So it just goes to tell you, and yet the continent is the one with the biggest burden and poverty, energy poverty. That is not sustainable, and that is certainly not multilateralism, right? There has to be a very clear message that is consistently and constantly drummed into our systems, global systems, that this isn't about charity, right? Africa is not asking for charity and a handout. This is about a collective responsibility to save our planet. And the place that you score the biggest on this is in Africa, because Africa can leapfrog. We have 600 million people without access to electricity. That energy gap has to be sorted, because otherwise we will not end poverty. So forget the SDGs, right? But at the same time, can we do this faster by transitioning to a low carbon economies? The answer is yes. Can Africa go it alone? The answer is no. So if you want really to get the gains on this, and we know the money is there, right? We've seen the money come out when COVID happened, trillions of dollars in stimulus deployed by many countries. We've seen it come out even with the war in Ukraine. We are living in an age of wealth in the world. So it's not for lack of resources. And we need to discuss this at COP27.
Yes.
How do we start to unlock the money for this transition and for closing the energy gap?
I want to bring it home now in terms of commitments. I mean, after such gatherings, a lot of people always say that we've had very beautiful conversations, we've had very great submissions, but usually the challenge is on the implementation of whatever comes out of such forums. And this I want to hear in terms of a commitment from UNDP perspective. Madam Ahunna, is there anything that UNDP is committing at this particular forum moving forward to be able to cut down on these very desperate numbers we're hearing of 800 million people worldwide not having, access to clean, affordable energy, and most of them in the sub-Saharan African countries. What is your commitment as UNDP moving forward to support in this line?
Well, last year UNDP launched its strategic plan, and in it one of the commitments is to really contribute to up to 500 million of those 800 million getting affordable access and sustainable access to energy. Now that's a bold commitment, but we believe it's possible because, first of all, UNDP's approach really is to build the partnerships, to get the coalitions behind making things move forward. So that is, being a convener of willing participants to actually look at how we connect the dots, whether you are in mini-grid production or you're looking at industrial facilitation, or you're looking at social services, because we need energy for health, we need energy for education. It's not just bulbs in households, it's really looking at the whole value chain of what helps a society prosper. So UNDP brings that sort of comprehensive approach to it, and it brings the partners together.